Maxwellton's braes are bonny, where early falls the dew. And is there that Annie Laurie gave me her promise true? Gave me her promise true, which ne'er forgot will be, and for bonny Annie Laurie I'd lay me down and dee. Hello everyone. Today we're making soap. I've been making goat's milk soap for, about eight years now, and it has turned into my favorite soap to use at home. I initially made it as a Christmas gift for all of my friends, and I had a few bars left over, and that's when I just fell in love with the stuff, and then I just continued to make it, and I loved it so much that I stopped giving it away. I actually became very covetous of my own soap. So today I'm going to show you how I make my famous in my circle of friends and family, my famous wise man soap. In Canada, in the 3rd grade, all kids have to learn about pioneers. I don't know if that's still the case, but when I was a kid, the pioneer unit was a mandatory thing, and it was something that I just loved so much. We learned about how the early European settlers cleared the forests and how they set up log cabins. And there was somewhere in there that we learned about soap making. It was just briefly touched upon. But when I heard about this, in my head, I thought, what? Making soap? Here's a book about Black Creek Pioneer Village, I think published in the 90s. And there's an engraving in here. I love this little book, out of print. In this book, there's a little drawing. It says, soap making in the early days. And I remember seeing this drawing, and it sort of ingrained itself in my mind. There are 2 women. They have a big cauldron over a fire. And in the description, it says, nothing was wasted on the pioneer farm. Scraps of pork, rinds, and fat were thrown into the barrel, and when enough had accumulated, the housewife made a batch of soap. Well, that was enough to make me want to do it. Soap making is a fascinating process, and even though I've been doing this for over 8 years, it has not ceased to be something that really feels a little magical. It's kind of magic that you can mix these things together and it produces a bar of soap. There are a couple of reasons I've been a little hesitant to share my soap making process with all of you out there. The first is that I'm not an expert yet on soap making. It's still something that I'm playing around with because it is very finicky. It is a chemical process, and your weights have to be very specific, the weights of the different ingredients. Temperature is also very important. So I don't feel like I'm an authority to be sharing this with you, but I'm doing this because so many of you have asked for me to show you how I do this. I'm going to show you how I do it. I am by no means suggesting that you do this at home. This is also not my recipe. I learned how to make soap from someone named Dr. Brent Ridge, who raises goats and who put out a recipe for goat's milk soap. So this is an adaptation of Dr. Brent's soap recipe. I've tweaked it to make it my own thing, adding some essential oils, but I want to give credit to Dr. Brent. Another reason I've been reluctant to share this process with you is because it is dangerous. Making soap is not something that is completely safe to do at home. You use something called lye, which you have to be very careful when you're working with lye. It's an alkaline substance and it can severely burn you. So, I'm going to show you how I do this. If you're interested in making soap, I strongly suggest that you do your research. Watch other videos, read about soap making, experiment on your own, wear protective gear, goggles, masks, long gloves, long clothing while you're making soap. And if you have a garage, or even if in the summertime, if you can do this outdoors, that really is the best place to do this. I don't have a house. I have a New York City apartment. So I make soap right here in my bedroom. Old school style. It's not old school style. What is that? What would we say? Gangster style. I'm making soap like a gangster, yo. This is the way that we make soap in the old country, ordinary primitive style. You know, you don't have a big fancy way of making soap. You just do it in a barn, you do it in a shed, you do what you need to do, you know what I mean, Heidi? So, let's get to it. I made a video about how to make an apron because I usually wear an apron when I do things like this. Protect your clothing. So an apron does two things for me. It not only protects my clothing, but it puts me in a different mind space. I always feel like when I put on my apron, it's like, okay, now it's time to get down to business. Bar soap, as we know it today, is not something that people have been using for thousands of years. In ancient Greece, in ancient Rome, they weren't washing themselves down with bars of soap. The way they actually cleaned themselves in ancient Rome was by putting oil on their bodies. They would put olive oil on their bodies, and they would use something called, I think it's called a sturgill, like a metal rod that they would scrape themselves off with. That was how they cleaned their skin. Soap, as we know it today, is a fairly recent thing, the last few hundred years. Bar soap was heavily taxed in Europe in the early 1800s. It was only after the 1830s that the tax was reduced. I can go on and on about soap because I'm obsessed about soap, but I'll spare you the details. Basically, when European settlers came to America, they made soap because it's not difficult to make soap. To make soap, early settlers used two things, lye and fat. The fat came from animals, sheep, pigs. Many early settlers raised pigs, and in the fall they would slaughter the pigs. They would have the meat, and then they would have a lot of fat. And this soft fat, the fat from pigs, lard, would be set aside for various things. One of them was soap making. Lye is an alkaline solution that would be made from hardwood ashes. So the ashes from maple trees, from oak trees, those trees would be burned, the ashes would be collected, and then they would put a lot of ash into a hollowed out log or a barrel. Water was slowly poured over the ash and allowed to seep through the ash very slowly. And by the time water got to the bottom of all of those ashes and trickled out the bottom of the log or the barrel, that clear liquid was lye, which is at that point a very dangerous substance. You can't touch it with your bare skin, it would burn your hands. And then this lye was actually tested for its strength. And there were many ways that settlers would test lye. You could float an egg in lye, and if the egg floated up to the top, then that was the strength of the lye that you needed to make soap. Early settlers had other ways of testing lye where they would weight a twig with a rock, put it in the lye, and watch the twig come up to the surface and blah, blah, blah. I'm just basically telling you that for hundreds of years, people made lye, and they used this lye for cleaning. It's very dangerous. Lye is not something that you put your hands into. It will burn your skin. But that same solution is what was required for soap. So the lye would be combined with animal fat. It would be boiled in a cauldron over a fire. And eventually they would have soft soap, which they could use for laundry or for cleaning. If they wanted hard soap, they would add salt to the boiling solution of lye and fat, and that would create a soap that could be poured into molds, hardened, and then cut into bars. To make this soap, you need 12 ounces of goat's milk, 3 ounces of lye crystals, 12 ounces of vegetable shortening. So I'm using vegetable shortening. You can use lard. You can use pig fat. This is historically what was used for hundreds of years to make soap. This is vegetable shortening, 12 ounces vegetable shortening, 4 ounces of olive oil, and 5 ounces of coconut oil. So I'm going to actually weigh all of this out as I'm mixing it together, and I'm going to weigh it out on a scale. The fat needs to be melted together in a pot. So the way I actually measure out the fat is I put my pot that I'm going to melt everything in directly onto the scale, and I tear the scale so that it's at 0. And now I add the fat to the pot directly. So I need 12 ounces of shortening. Just going to measure that out. That's 10.85. You want to be as precise as possible with this. There. 12 ounces of shortening. Now, once I see 12 on my scale, I press tare again to take it to 0. And now I can add my coconut oil. Coconut oil will solidify at a certain temperature, and it'll liquefy very quickly when it gets slightly warm. So it's fairly cold in this room, so the coconut oil is solidifying. If it's solid, you can scoop it out. If it's liquid, you pour it. So I need 5 ounces of coconut oil. The different fats saponify differently with the lye. So certain bars of soap are hard, and certain bars of soap are fairly soft when they start to get wet. I hate when I have a bar of soap and I'm using it in the shower and it starts to get slimy and soggy. Like you use it and then you put it in the soap dish and it's all slimy and soggy, and it doesn't get hard again. So that quality of certain bars of soap being slimy or softer, certain bars of soap being really hard, that comes from what kind of fat is combined with the lye. So coconut oil and lye react very differently than olive oil and lye. And this combination of different fats is specific for this recipe to create a nice hard bar of soap. 5 ounces coconut oil. And now I need 4 ounces of olive oil. I'm going to tare my scale again so it's at 0. Now I'm going to add 4 ounces of olive oil. And I do this very slowly because you can add it, but it's not easy to take it out. 4. There. Now I have my fat in my pot. I'm going to take this to the stove and I'm going to melt it. You want this fat to be between 90 and 100 degrees. So you melt it, put a thermometer in it, and if it's too hot, let the temperature come down before you mix it with the lye solution. I'll be right back. Okay, the fat has melted in the kitchen and now it's cooling down. While that's happening, I'm going to mix up my lye solution. The very interesting thing about lye is that when the lye crystals are mixed with a liquid, the solution actually heats up, like on its own. It gets hot. So you want the lye solution to be around the same temperature as the fat solution, around 90 to 95 degrees. Because the lye heats up when it's mixed with liquid, it does help to partially freeze this goat's milk. So I usually put it in the freezer for a few hours just until it crystallizes, and then I take it out and mix it with the lye. That's Dr. Brent's way of doing this so that the lye solution is cooler faster. Put on my mask. Goodbye. This is called Rajiv the Soap Maker. Now, I get my bowl. I'm going to tear the bowl. 12 ounces goat's milk. Three ounces lye. Now, you have to use a stainless steel spoon. Do not use a wooden spoon. I think you can use plastic. I don't know about plastic. Don't use wood. Stainless steel spoon for this. Very gently add the lye to the liquid. And see, there's crystals, there's little bits in here. Be very careful. You don't want to touch that with your bare hands. So whenever I have lye in a dish, I'm very conscious that I've used this for lye. I set it aside and I wash it carefully with gloved hands later. And I mix it very gently. And the lye crystals change color. They turn kind of orange. So these lye crystals have to be completely dissolved in the milk. You don't want any clumps of lye, because if there are clumps of lye, those clumps can stay in your soap as lumps of lye, and that would be very dangerous when you're actually using the soap. So you want this to be completely dissolved. And this solution is going to actually get warm. Once the lye has dissolved in the milk, I add the fat solution. And I add this slowly while stirring. So I have my stick blender, and this, I'm going to immerse this in here, and I'm going to blend this together really well. While I'm doing this, I'm going to be very careful to keep this immersed in the liquid so that it's not going to splatter everywhere. So I blend a little bit, and then I manually stir. If you're doing this at home, keep your mask on. It's just always safer, but I want to be able to speak to you clearly. What I'm doing now is I'm going to blend this until it's thick enough to come to a level which we call trace. And trace is where if I lift this up and allow the soap to fall on the surface, I can see the stream that falls on the surface. It's almost there, but it's not quite there yet. Now at this point, right before it comes to the trace thickness, I like to add some essential oils. And this is my trademarked Wise Man soap, because what I put in here is frankincense and myrrh. So my frankincense and myrrh is a really high quality oil. And just put a little bit of this. Okay. There's the myrrh. Here's the frankincense. It smells so good. A few drops. I think that the addition of these oils is what makes this soap so nice on the skin. Like if I have eczema or a dry skin, or if I have a cut, I find the soap healing. Okay, now continue to blend until it thickens up, and you'll see it happening. stop every now and then and stir it with the immersion blender manually. Almost there. Do you see that? Do you see how it's sitting on the surface slightly? When I lift it up and let it drip, you can see the traces of the drip. It's almost there. And now this part is done. I try to get as much of this off the blender as possible because it's so precious. And now the soap is ready for the mold. So this is a soap mold. It's a loaf mold, so it forms a long loaf of soap which is then cut into bars. And it comes apart. So carefully pour the soap into the mold. And I can feel this bowl is warm. This chemical process of saponification, it's something that takes quite a while to complete. Just because the solution of lye and fat has been mixed together and blended, this chemical process is not over yet. I'm pouring this liquid soap into the mold, but it's going to take 24 hours for it to harden. And in that 24 hours, it's actually going to continue to heat up. While it's heating up, you want it to not get overheated. So what I do is I stick this directly in the freezer right now. And in about 5 or 6 hours, I'll take it out of the freezer. Even when it comes out of the freezer, it's still continuing its chemical process. So after a day, the soap will be hard enough to cut into bars, but even when it's cut into bars, it has to sit for at least 2 to 3 weeks to cure before it's safe enough to use. Tap this down. And now I'm just going to take this and put this in the freezer. Here's a batch of soap that I made yesterday. This was made 24 hours ago. You should not touch this soap, even though it's solid now. You shouldn't touch it with your bare skin because it's still pretty dangerous. It can burn your skin, and you should definitely not use it until it's cured. This soap is safe to use after about 2 weeks of curing, but I personally like to leave the soap for 6 months. You know, some of the nicest gifts I've ever received are tools that have been given to me or made for me. And this is my soap cutter that was made by Guy Wolf. And once I was telling him about cutting soap, and I was saying I just sort of cut it by eyeballing it. And he said, you need a kind of a guillotine for cutting soap. And he ran down to the basement and he made me this wooden block for cutting my soap, and it was the sweetest thing. I have good friends. Okay, this soap mold's great because it just comes apart. So it's held together by a couple of pins. And then the soap is released. Now, I am still a novice at this. Because I wing it, because I don't check the temperature, sometimes I cut the soap and liquid seeps out. It is not completely solidified at this stage. And if that happens, it's okay. I've learned it's fine. I just take the bars, I put them on a rack, and once they're hardened, everything does harden. It's not the prettiest bar of soap, but it still works and it's safe to use. Okay, the moment of truth. Still feels very soft. This is too soft. to unmold. I should wait. I should wait another day or so because it will harden, but for the sake of the camera, I'm going to keep going. While it's still like this, you can move it around. Oh, that came off nicely. So that's what it should look like. If it's hard enough, the plastic will just slide right off the soap. Let's see this side. Ah, there we go. Look at this. Okay, so it should come off like this and be nice and smooth. But it's very delicate at this stage. Can it come off? There we go. Lovely. I'm gonna leave this base on here. I'm gonna put the soap into my guillotine. I'm gonna try cutting this with a piece of wire. Really, this is not ideal. I should use a wire cutter used for clay, but this might work. Yes. There we go. Okay, no oozing liquid. This was a good batch. It worked. Now this looks like this at this point, very creamy and completely opaque, but as the soap cures, it darkens and it becomes kind of translucent. And that's the saponification process actually continuing over the course of a couple of weeks. So this is what I do. I cut my bar of soap and I just stand them upright because they should have air circulating around them as they cure. This is the part where you get to enjoy the fruits of your labor, cutting the bars of soap. 2. Looks like cheese. Looks so tasty. Three. Great batch of soap this time. While you're working with the soap at this stage, it still will burn you. So you need to wear protective gear on your skin, but once it's cured, it's ready to use and it's safe to handle without gloves. So this is the soap. And this batch had a little leaking of liquid. When I cut it, there was some oil leaking out. It hadn't completely coagulated. So that's what this is, but it's still perfectly fine to use. But you can see how different it is compared to the new stuff. Like this started out looking like this, and this will cure to look like this. There you have it. How I make my wise man soap with goat's milk and a whole bunch of other things, including frankincense and myrrh. I do not encourage you to try this at home. It is dangerous, it is finicky, but this is what I do a couple times a year so that I always have a stock of my precious soap in here. And because it's such a wonderful part of my regular everyday life using this soap, I'm really happy to share it with you. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.